Okay. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. Today is I think we're at the 4th webinar in the series of 6. I'd like to thank all of our presenters for being here today. I'm actually going to introduce our moderator, Jonathan Summer, shortly, and then Jonathan's going to go ahead and introduce our presenters in a second here in the order they appear. And actually, Jonathan, maybe we could introduce the presenters right before they speak rather than trying to introduce them all at once. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, the International Institute of Humanitarian Law. We have 2 folks here today from the Institute who will be speaking to us, Xavier and Gianluca. I'd also like to thank the International NGO Security and Safety Association, INSA, the University of C Center for International Security and Diplomacy, which, as you all know, is home to the Private Security Monitor Project that Debbie Avent runs. I'd like to also thank the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, and also for the helpful advice and support of Chris Kinsey at King's College's Defense Studies Department. And I'd also like to thank our intern, Mohammed, for doing an excellent job running the webinars, and my co-director, John Richardson, for all his help with the workshop webpage, which is www.ihrib.org. Excuse me, there you're going to find past webinars as well as various materials that we're sending and we'll be using throughout the webinars. So today's webinar picks up where the last 2 left off. Excuse me, the last 2 were focused on who needs to be trained and on what. And this webinar will focus on providers and methods of delivering trainings. And just excuse me for 1 second here while I go on mute and cough. Okay, sorry about that, folks. There's a season for colds. In any case, this workshop's today, as I said, we'll deal with providers and methods of delivering trainings. In other words, we're looking at the pedagogy behind training. How does one effectively deliver trainings, when and where, and using what types of methods? You all should have received via email some discussion questions that will frame today's conversation. Those discussion questions are also available on our website. In addition, for today's scenario-based discussion, additional information was sent around. Namely, there was some guidance that came straight from the government, the transitional government of Alta Sierra, guidance on PMSCs and PMCs. So I have that handy too when we get to the scenario portion of our conversation today. Now, I've been asked to briefly summarize some of the very vibrant and discussion that's been going on via the email burst. Glenn, I don't think, is with us yet. She'll be joining us a little bit later, but Glenn Evans needs to be thanked for, I think, really getting that discussion really going. Glenn, your provocative emails are very useful. And I'm going to touch base with other conference organizers here, excuse me, to discuss whether or not it might make sense to go to a Google group format for the simple reason that those of you who are joining the conversation a bit later can't see the history of what's been discussed since we're just kind of emailing everybody back and forth via reply all. So I'll look into that and get back to you on that front. Now, in terms of trying to summarize, I am going to try to hit on a few points because it's been a very complex and a very nuanced discussion. So I just want to try to briefly give everyone a sense of where we've gone. And then rather than opening up the discussion now to talk about what's been said to date, I think we're going to kind of integrate that with our discussion at the end of the webinar. So really quickly, what did we talk about in these email exchanges? The first one, I think, was kind of really taking a step back and talking about what the objectives of training is. You know, obviously the standards that are relevant for the industry dictate quite a bit, but with the lack of universal agreement on the baseline content of trainings and also bearing in mind the need to tailor trainings to the who and the where, I think we need to think about what outcomes the trainings are meant to achieve. And Professor Gambone mentioned a few, you know, ensuring greater competence of PSCs, ensuring a safe and effective delivery of services, trainings contribute to the cohesiveness of teams, they help understand how to interact better with the military, especially if they're based on military trainings. Professor Gambone had sent out a list of trainings that military personnel are required to use that may also be relevant for PSCs. Training on the respective local population also being very important in terms of being aware of how one impacts on local populations, and also the fact that common skill sets facilitate evaluation. So all of these things are basically objectives of training, and they also lead us towards understanding better what the content should be. And then taking one step back, I think it was Lyle Alexander made a really interesting point about thinking about the larger mission of the, as he put it, their intervention in which PSCs are involved. So thinking that ultimately, as he put it, the assumed objective is to restore the locale to some semblance of acceptable normalcy post the armed conflict stage, and then asking the question, so what do we need to include in trainings bearing that larger mission in mind? So objectives at two levels there, I think. Who to train? We had a long list of who's. Chris Mayer sent out a summary. Other folks have added to that list. But I think in terms of knowing the who's, there was also the issue of thinking about the who, their skill set, their existing educational levels, and what kind of positions they're going to fill within a mission. And there, the issue was raised about the importance of tailoring language and also tailoring the training to be appropriate for that particular skill level. Someone had mentioned that, a cookie-cutter approach to training simply won't work. And also the fact that not everybody needs to know everything to the same degree, which is why someone had mentioned, I think it was John McGarry, the importance of modular trainings, and also to look to what's already being done. The IHL presenters today, I know they're going to touch on some of the kind of handbooks that they have available and that we can potentially draw on as we're developing trainings. Another thing with regards to the who needs training, I think it was Ali mentioned the importance of not stigmatizing providers in any fashion, assuming they're, waiting to be a bad apple in some way or another, but rather to, and also not just to focus on the don'ts, what you're not supposed to do, but rather to enable them to know appropriate behaviors and identify inappropriate behavior when they see it, and to create a management system that allows them to report back to their superiors, I would add, without fearing any kind of negative consequences as a result. Along these lines, someone else, I'm sorry if I don't remember who wrote what, because I went through all these many emails this morning very early, but along the lines of the selection and vetting of providers, someone had made the important point of interviewing, that someone can have on paper the great skill set, but they may not be appropriate for a particular task, and that one can only really find that out by interviewing them. And then in terms of the who, not so much who needs to be trained, but the who should use management system standards more broadly. There was a discussion, Glenn mentioned these points about perhaps it would be something appropriate for NGOs to consider applying some of these management system standards. And I added, I think it would be relevant to also think about companies who have large in-house security divisions. That's the case for some of our friends in the extractive industry. And also the question of, well, will these companies, will these NGOs be interested in using, like, for example, PSC1? And I think the feeling that was expressed, I think this came from Glenn as well, was that that once we have the first certification bodies accredited, and the standards will probably start catching on, including in the private sector and not just in the case of government clients. In terms of the what, we had some discussion around whether or not there's convergence in standards, the degree to which they cross-reference each other. For example, PSC1 mentions the ICOC in the Montreux document. There was a discussion and mention of pilot projects that are underway. I think that's something we really would all like to hear much more about. Unfortunately, we could not have a UCAS rep, was unavailable to be on the workshop, but I think from some of the companies that are involved and some of the consultants and the certification bodies, I think it would be great to try to learn more about that pilot project, but recognizing, of course, there's some degree of confidentiality in order to get everything stood up in an expedited fashion. And then the issue is also raised whether or not there's agreement on baseline trainings and appropriate content. And I think the feeling was that there's probably not that kind of universal agreement, but that there is, hold on, I'm just reading my notes here real quick. That certain types of trainings, that, as I said before, that the military personnel may receive are also appropriate potentially for some of the security providers. And also there was a great degree of focus on the importance and challenge of training local nationals, and also in turn on the importance of training to respect local populations. And that gets back to the point I think that Lyle Alexander made. And then finally, in lead up till next week, excuse me again, quality assurance came up. In terms of the discussion brought up by James Rapp about the complex architecture of quality assurance. And really, it's amazing you think about it, from the bodies that set national standards to the bodies that accredit certification bodies to the the auditors, who themselves are certified, and the trainers of auditors who can also be certified. So there's really a quite tremendous architecture, and we're going to hear more about that next week as well. And then also the issue of quality assurance came up with regards to security provision at the local, provided by local companies versus larger international companies. And then finally, there were some questions that arose that I don't think we really kind of have answered yet. Questions with regards to what are the standards that auditors are trained to, and are they being set in a consistent and rigorous fashion? And then a question was raised about the size of the market for all of this. As those of you involved in the pilot project, I'm sure are realizing it's quite a tremendous undertaking to set up that infrastructure around a standard. So is the market for maritime and land-based security and standard setting and certification in terms of one's ability to provide those services in an efficient and also quality fashion, can that market sustain all of this? So I think that's pretty much kind of a summary to date of the conversation that's been going on the email burst, and I encourage others to join in. And with that, I am going to turn it over. Mohammed, if you could please unmute Jonathan. I'm going to introduce Jonathan here, and then we'll let Jonathan take over in terms of moderating. So, Jonathan, thank you for being with us today. And Jonathan is an international law and policy consultant with expertise in armed non-state actor. He continues to consult for Geneva Call, one of his former employers, where he's been legal advisor and program coordinator since 2008. And for those of you who don't know Geneva Call, I encourage you to go to the website. It's really fascinating what they're doing in terms of trying to bring non-state actors involved in armed conflict into compliance with humanitarian law. So I think, tremendous undertaking there. Previously, Jonathan worked with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Macedonia. And he was also an international law consultant with the Humanitarian Policy and Conflict Research Program at Harvard. And there he worked on the issue of private military and security companies. He was also worked with the International Law Department of the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the Copenhagen process for the handling of detainees in multilateral military operations. In 2007, he was awarded the Henry Dunant Prize in honor of the founder of the Red Cross movement for innovative research on armed non-state actors. He has extensive experience in developing, leading, and organizing trainings on international humanitarian and human rights law for non-state actors, which is why it's so appropriate he's here with us today, as well as managing training pools. He sits on several expert groups related to armed non-state actors and has a BA from the University of Ontario and a JD from the University of British Columbia and LLM from the Geneva Academy. So Jonathan, thank you for being with us today, and I'll let you take it from here. Is he on mute? Okay. Oh, Jonathan, you still need to unmute yourself, actually.
Okay, I hope I'm unmuted now.
Yes, you are. We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Rebecca, many thanks for having me, and thank you very much for the introduction. I would have to say that the topic, or I should say the subtopic that we have today, raises so many questions in itself that I find it quite fascinating, and I really look forward to the discussion. I don't want to take up too much time right now, so I would like to get into introducing the first presenter. The one thing I would like to say to all the presenters is, as we don't have face-to-face, as I can't give you snarly looks to wind down on time or pass you notes, please beware of the time, 5 to 10 minutes per presentation, and that way we'll be able to have enough time for what I imagine will be some very interesting discussion. We will start with Dr. Erin Ralby, who is Director of Linguisticator, which is a company specializing in developing intensive and highly scalable language training programs. Erin has a PhD in medieval studies from Cornell University, and he has masters in several languages that not many people speak anymore. Currently, Erin is in Tripoli, where he's running a trial of ELT Tiger, which is an intensive English language training program designed for the Libyan military. So, Dr. Ralby, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, can you hear me?
I hear you, so I imagine everybody else does.
Great.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for having me today. Yes, so I am the director of Linguisticator. We develop intensive language training programs, and I am in Tripoli, in Libya, delivering a trial of a training program we've developed for the Libyan military. And this program was developed under the sponsorship of the UK Ministry of Defence, and it had to meet several requirements. And so, oh, hang on a sec. I've been made presenter. It had to meet several requirements. So I was going to start off with what these requirements were, and then the principles we applied in addressing the challenges of these requirements. So the English language training is considered a gateway to other forms of training, and so it's a kind of prerequisite for the Libyan military as they look to develop capabilities in a wide range of skills. So the program had to be one that could be delivered at scale, and we're talking tens of thousands or possibly hundreds of thousands or more people going through the program. It had to demonstrate an increase in efficiency over existing methods. It had to demonstrate increased effectiveness over existing methods. It had to show decreased costs, and it had to be delivered in country and capable of being delivered in hostile environments. So it was an interesting set of challenges, and it was one that took a good bit of thinking to actually solve. I'm going to step back now and talk about some of the components of training programs, because I'm going to speak more generally here, not just about language training, but about training programs, because I think it would be more widely applicable. And looking at training programs, there are essentially three main components. There's the skill that needs to be acquired, and it needs to be taught, and that's sort of the objective of the program. And then there's the content and the process necessary to get trainees to the acquisition of that skill. So there's a certain amount of content, of material, and then there's a process by which trainees are able to internalize that content and develop the skills that are necessary. And in looking at the content and the process, there are several components to a training program. The first would be dissemination of information. The same material is going to need to be presented to the trainees and across training groups. Then there's also repetition. So the material, if you just express something once, it's very difficult you can't really expect someone to then know it, so the material needs to be repeated. Exercises, drills need to be repeated. And then there's an element of demonstration, so not only the final skill, the end product, but also the steps necessary to take trainees to that final skill. These all need to be demonstrated, because the exercises, the drills, the progression can look very different from the end skill. So that all needs to be demonstrated. Then there's also assessments, and then there's live practice and feedback and correction. And in looking at these different components of a training program, it's important to look at what resources can be allocated to each component. The greatest resource is the human resource. That's the most valuable. And so it's important not to waste trainers' time. So if you have highly skilled trainers, it's important not to waste their time. So we wanted to ask who or what is necessary for each component of the program, to deliver each component of the program. Do we need the same people to deliver the entire program? Do we need people to deliver the entire program? And we were looking to save high-value people for high-value tasks. So what we ended up doing was putting the majority of content into video and using digital media to capture knowledge and capture high-quality instruction. Because for several of the components of the training program, for the dissemination of information, for repetition, for demonstration, we found that video is actually in many ways better than a human delivering it. Video does not need a visa. It does not need security. It doesn't get sick. It doesn't have logistical conflicts or problems or scheduling conflicts. And video can also be delivered with subtitles, so it can be delivered in multiple languages. It can be delivered online or offline. There are many advantages, and in terms of demonstration, you know, there are several advantages there that you can repeat the same video. It's easy for everyone to see. So we were looking at using digital media to capture knowledge and capture the highest quality of instruction, because then we can scale this core portion of the program, and the quality would also scale. Because if you're looking at train-the-trainer programs, if you go from needing 10 trainers to 1,000 trainers, it's very difficult to scale the quality and make sure that quality remains high. So we were using video and digital media for content, but then there's also the process side of things. And so we realized that we can use lower skilled individuals to run the process of a lot of the training program. When certain material is shown to the trainees, running them through exercises, making sure that people are attending, dealing with the discipline issues, all these little bits and pieces that end up becoming very important in dealing with the people in training programs. So we can use, rather than instructors per se, we could use facilitators, and these facilitators could be locals. So we can use locals and help actually foster a local economy by running this process, but still exposing students to high quality instruction. And then we can save our high value instructors for where they're needed most, which is in the live practice and the feedback and that kind of interaction. So in terms of looking at training programs and commercial providers, it's important to assess whether a commercial provider segments the different aspects of a training program and look at how they deliver these different aspects. Are they focused on efficiency of their human resource? And if not, then it's probably not a training program that would work at scale. And if you're looking at creating a program, then I would strongly encourage you to think about using technology and using digital media to capture any kind of knowledge that is going to need to be repeated, whether repeated within the same training group or across training groups. And in terms of creating modular programs, you can take the same content and cut it up in different ways, which is very, very useful. So these are some of the, this is a topic I could talk about at length, but these are some of the principles that we applied in solving the requirements, addressing the requirements that we were given in creating an English language training program for the Libyan military.
Jonathan, if I may jump in real quick. First, thank you very much, Aaron. Just a heads up, I think in terms of the next two presentations, we're actually going to do Gianluca first. He's going to give a little bit of an introduction before Xavier takes it from there. So just FYI in terms of the arrangement of the speakers. Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Aaron, and I'm sure we're going to come back to some of that very interesting methodological presentation of not necessarily the substance, but how training is done. I'd like to introduce Gianluca Baruta, who has a master's degree in international political science from the University of Turin and is currently assistant to the Secretary General of the International Institute of Humanitarian Law in San Remo, where he supports the Secretary General in identifying and developing potential partnerships, establishing contacts, and maintaining communications with governments, IOs, national authorities, and other stakeholders. He also provides assistance in the development of several specific training projects in the field of IHL and refugee law. With that, I will pass it over to Gianluca, and then we will move to the Colonel. Are you there, Gianluca? We don't hear you, so maybe your microphone is muted.
Sorry, Jonathan, I'm going to jump in here. I'm not quite sure what the issue is. We tested Gianluca and it seemed to work before. Gianluca, you are receiving a chat message from the organizer to try to figure out what's going on while we can't hear you. Sorry, folks. There we go. Is he? Jim, can you hear? He cannot hear us? Okay. We can't hear you, Gianluca, for some reason. If you're using a headphone, just double check it's plugged in all the way. And if you have a mic and speakers on your computer itself, try just taking out the headphone and just using your computer mic and speakers directly. Okay. Gianluca, is that you? Okay. Sorry, folks. I guess it had to happen at one of these webinars that we had technical problems.
Rebecca, the Colonel has offered to start. Do you think that would be an idea?
Yes, I think that'd be an excellent idea. Yeah. Gianluca, while the Colonel's starting, if you could perhaps just try logging out and logging back in again, that may reset everything, and maybe we can move from there. Okay, so sorry. Yeah, we'll hand it over. Mohammed, can you hand the screen to the Colonel? Okay. All right, great. We'll do that.
I'll introduce him.
Please, yeah. Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay. So as I always like a challenge, I am going to try to pronounce the name of the Colonel. I hope that if I do a good job on this, you might recommend me for Legion of Honor. Colonel Xavier Perrat.
It's all right, said Xavier Perrat. Do you hear me?
Okay, I was unmuted there for a moment, so now I think I'm back. I'm in the process of introducing, and at the risk of not getting the name right, I will try, Colonel Xavier Perrat.
You're doing fine.
Thank you. I was very nervous about that. He's a colonel with the French Air Force, recently assigned by France to the San Remo Institute as the Deputy Director of the Military Department. He has been a senior legal advisor to the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Air Force in charge of international relations, also legal advisor to the military head of the Togolese presidency candidate, as well as senior legal advisor to the general commanding the air defense and air operations during campaigns in Libya and Mali. He's been deployed in Chad, Bosnia, and Afghanistan, and has recently graduated from the NATO Defense College. Colonel, I will hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and good morning to all. I know it's still pretty early in America, but here it's about it's around actually 4:30, and the light is going down. So to get to the point, I'm going to cover the challenges we have and the process we put together at the Institute of San Remo for the training and dissemination of the law, international law. To start with, I need to mention the fact that we do not exclusively cover the law of armed conflict, but we also cover, as Gianluca probably will mention later, the law of refugees law, migrations law, disasters law, and a number of things. You can see on your screen the picture of the first course related to the law on conflict in 1976. There was 7 participants. You have on the side another picture of this 149th LAC Foundation course. But the last one actually gathered no less than 100 different participants coming from all over the world, and we run it in 4 different languages, in English, in Chinese, in Russian, and in Arabic. And we draw from the experience of a number of very talented course leaders and class responsible class leaders. And we actually have, I think, quite a huge success also with refugees law, which is largely provided by HCR presenters. But to get to what we actually face with regard to our activity, we have first to be good enough to enroll participants. And when you talk about participants, what is our policy? And enrolling them, what is our policy? Well, we try to keep our the fees to participate in the courses rather low. When you look at the competition all around, because there is competition in this field, we think we are pretty cheap, even though we are very good. And you look at an expense that's 900 euros per week, and we do not, of course, cover the flight expenses or anything like that. That's for the paying participants. We have to reach and to convince those individuals, and we keep a huge database, and we try to reach out to them. And the people now we have to convince is more and more often. With the sequester, with the different aspects of the economic crisis striking all over the world, we have to convince budget managers, and we spend quite a lot of time convincing them. We have also a number of scholarship participants. Those participants we need to identify, and the ICRC, for example, in the field delegation of the ICRC help us with that. We have to make them register, and that's a quite complicated process, what with the visa difficulties that we might have. And we finally have to monitor actually that participation. When you talk about people coming from certain countries, they have a tendency to feel like they should be staying in Europe, and that's not exactly what we are about. So we have to monitor also our participants from time to time. We also, of course, what's our point mostly is to be effective with regard to training, and with regard to that, we draw on a wide range of experiences and perspectives. We actually have people coming from all over the world as participants, and as class leaders or course directors. And that's really the policy of San Remo, to put all these people together, to blend them, and to make them work together, and to actually think together in a very practical way. So our process is generally the following. We do have lectures provided by academics, people coming from the best European or American universities, or otherwise actually, and we do insist later on the discussion relating to the matter that has been raised during the plenary, and we do have a number of exercises. And to tell you the truth, when we actually ask the participants what they have preferred in the San Remo experiences, it's the exercises that put them together, that makes them work together, make them think together, and brief also sometimes together. So all of this to say that this is what what we call the spirit of San Remo, which is, I think, rather unique, and for having benefited myself from it as early as 2003. I think it hasn't changed a bit. If anything, it has gotten better. And this is an example here on your screen, an example of what you find. You find actually military people, you find diplomats, you find students, you find civilian legal advisors or barristers or whatever, and they all get together and they think and they talk and they actually with a view to providing very practical solutions to the sometimes very theoretical problems we make them, we confront them with. But we're also very capable, we perfectly are able to, that was in San Remo, but we actually can work in other places, like that was the case in Pretoria in March 2013. We sent people, we actually had one guy from South Africa who we often use as a class leader or course director, but we sent 2 other people to deliver courses to a public in South Africa, and that was, I think, quite successful. And we do a number of very quite difficult exercises, which actually could be quite interesting for PMSC people, where, for example, we create a mock tribunal with regard to the status of prisoners of war, and we create scenarios. As you may know, in certain circumstances, the personnel from private military security companies could claim the status of prisoners of war. And I'm not going to delve into this, and I want especially to address the other matter at hand. Sorry, too fast. Yeah, we do have, and excuse my French if you heard me. Yeah, we do have that. What we do is actually needs to be absolutely relevant to military operations, and for that we do have this multinational training, and we work, for example, on a subject as the rules of engagement in a very specific way, in a very practical way. That's really what we do, and we do this without actually being penalized, without being without encountering any difficulties with regard to the classification of material, because we created our RE frame, which is actually quite well known now, the Rules of Engagement Handbook, which is now in process of being reviewed. But we have ways, very practical ones, to actually avoid the use of NATO or EU or American rules of engagement. We have our own set of rules of engagement, which has been developed and quite often in use, even away from, even aside from the institute. And for example, it has been found already very useful in former naval exercises. But for this Pacific Rim naval exercise of 2014, no less than 22 nations are going to be gathered. And guess what? They're going to use our RE handbook, because this way they do not have any problem they don't have any problem with regard to actually providing their rules of engagement to any other nations. And we are actually very well known for this kind of operator's manual, like this one, which is the international, which is the one regarding the international law applicable to armed conflict at sea. Again, very much in use by naval operators all around the world. We do have, we want to be relevant, and to be relevant, we also run very specific, apart from the foundation courses or basic courses in law on conflict or refugees law. We actually have state-of-the-art and very specific workshops like the one on detention, deals with interrogation techniques and detention and itself. We do have and we develop actually a number of other courses as required by the actuality, as required by the issues we see raising, and for example, we are creating in 2014 a course that tests with regard to targeting in new and all environments. But we, of course, we have also advanced courses in law-armed conflict, and we actually we have speaker expertise on all courses, and we actually put people in situation. This is an example of what we've done in Indonesia in April 2013. We brought to Indonesia high-level expertise, and we put people in, according to what the Indonesian Armed Forces wanted, we put people in situation. And the training had to do with law and conflict and also with human rights law, which is of course of immense interest in a number of situations like those that the PMSC actually encounter day after day, where they intervene. And yeah, again, very situational, very interactive, and a number of good experiences in that field. Just one of the last things to mention, and I'll be hopefully having Gianluca speak for the IHL itself. We do have also non-international and conflict workshop, which is also of immense interest, I think, I do believe, to PMSC, and we are quite ready to actually do specific ad hoc courses to train personnel, and we just have to decide at which level. Depth of experience, we do have this, and finally, we want to also mention the fact that not only we want to influence the way operations are conducted as we speak, but we also want to influence the debate and to influence the influencers, and that's why we run roundtables, or we run director's courses, gathering, which is going to actually take place in 2 weeks now. And we also want to influence the commanders of the future. We do have an academy competition gathering cadets from all around the world, literally, and where we actually make them work together, and they are actually getting a good feeling about the influence of the law and conflict in military operations. And that's basically what the IHL is all about. And that's all from me, folks. I'm ready, of course, to take questions when time comes. Over to you.
Many thanks, Colonel. I think what I'm going to do is just hand it directly over to Gianluca. Away you go.
Okay, can you hear me?
We hear you now, Gianluca. Perfect.
Okay, good. So thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting the Institute to take part to this seminar. Actually, it should have been the way around, and Xavier already mentioned some details of the training. Anyway, I will give a short overview on the International Institute of Humanitarian Law and its activities. The Institute, the International Institute of Humanitarian Law, is an independent and non-profit organization with the mission is to promote the understanding and application of international humanitarian law, human rights, and related issues, also refugee law and migration law mainly. It has been founded in 1970 in Sanremo, Italy, by a group of on the initiative of a group of international lawyers coming from different parts of the world. And there's few words on the structure. According to Italian law, the Institute is a private association. So it's constituted by members, private members, who actually generate the General Assembly, which is the biggest organ of the Institute. And we have over 300 members coming from more than 40 different countries. The General Assembly elects the Council, which consists of 12 members, elected, as I said, by the General Assembly, which mandate is 4 years, and the Council will elect the President, which has the same, who has the same mandate as the Council. The current President is Professor Fausto Boca, who is currently judge to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Vice President, Secretary General and Treasurer, together with the President, constitute the Executive Board. Then we have the Military Department and the Refugee Immigration Law Office. I'm actually in the middle of the triangle between the line of the Vice President, Secretary General, and the Military Department and Refugee Immigration Law Office. The Military Department, as mentioned by Xavier before, is providing training specifically on IHL or Law of Armed Conflict, as you wish, and all related subjects. And the Refugee Immigration Law Office is dealing with the training on refugee law, migration law, and IDPs issues. The Institute works basically in partnerships, either collaborations. Its activities are actually international renowned, and its result as the Institute has a consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council, and with the Council of Europe as well. Main partners of the Institute are the ICRC and the High Commissioner for Refugees, the UNHCR. Also, the International Organization for Migration play a role in funding some training activities. We have quite an interesting list of various NGOs and military and academic institutions which we actually collaborate basically every year. The activity of the Institute, as mentioned by Xavier before, we can divide it in three main sections: training, seminar, and roundtables, and research and publication. Training is, of course, the main sorry, the main activity of the Sanremo Institute. Training is designed for a diverse, international, and multicultural audience, and participation is welcome from, let's say, military personnel, government officials, international organization representatives, diplomats, experts, and also NGO representatives coming from different regions of the world. We will see later on a little bit in detail. Training on IHL and refugee law are divided in training courses and workshops. So we have these two different separate set of training. Dialogue on International Humanitarian Law, it's basically the organization of an annual roundtable on a topic of IHL. The topic for September 2013 was respecting IHL challenges and response, while in 2012 we had a very interesting topic which really fits in what we are discussing today. It's private military security companies and IHL. Actually saw before Celia White, who was among the speakers of the 2012 Sanremo Roundtable. Besides this, the Institute also organized ad hoc seminars either in Sanremo or in other locations outside Italy. Publications, we do some research according to the funding we have, and of course the Sanremo Rules of Engagement Handbook, which has been translated into the six official languages of the UN, and also in Bosnia, Hungary, and Thailand results the last and probably also the most interesting handbook which the Institute produced recently. This is a slide on the attendees, which I will skip because maybe it's not really relevant. Training ethos or guiding principles, whatever you want to call. First of all, I would say expertise. The training is delivered by practitioners, mainly I would say more practitioners than academics in the field, senior military, officials from international organizations, from governments, and also NGO. Of course, the course, the training content of the course are regularly revised and updated, of course, to ensure the more effective relevance to the current issues. Practical, as mentioned before by Xavier, we do have a very practical approach in our training programs. The training is actually delivered using a practical experience-based instruction, and we conduct also syndicate exercise in order to making the most possible interaction among the participants, and not only among the participants themselves, but also between the participants and the facilitators as well. Independency, this is for us, it's very important because these training ethos actually are important to define what we call the spirit of San Remo somehow. So independency, the training programs are held in a natural and very open environment, which allow also very friendly and constructive debates, which are suitable for military and of course civilian personnel. International is the attraction of attendees from a wide range of countries. If I go back to the training, you can see that we have either for the teaching staff that for the attendees we have a very wide and interesting participation, representing basically all the 5 continents and more or less something like 160 countries in the world. On the teaching staff, I would like to spend just a few words. As you see, we have also the representative among the teaching staff, all the regions of the world, and of course the most important international organization. The interesting thing is that the teaching staff is working on a voluntary basis, so this is very important to mention. Institute training programs.
Yeah, Luca, I'm going to ask you to just please wind down in the next minute or so. Thank you.
Yes, okay. So very briefly, the training, this is the last slide, the training programs. You see we have 2 specific set of training courses and training activities. One is dealing with IHL or low-var conflict, and the other associated subject, which is structured on 3 tiers, which are developing one from the other one. So the tier 1 is the foundation courses, which provide participants with a very practical introduction to IHL. Tier 2 it's specialized, includes specialized courses, and we have quite a range of interesting courses like international law and naval operations, or director's course, which will be running in December, and so on. And this is aimed at the personnel who require very practical understanding of specific area of IHL. Tier 3 is consisting workshops, and so going to the refugee, IDPs, and migration law area. are basically equally interactive and designed for practitioners, and they actually try to aim to focus on the applicable law in the context of correct operation international challenges. I think I'm done with the presentation. Sorry if I was a bit longer in the framework of the time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Gianluca. We're going to move now to look at the in-house perspective, and for that I'm going to introduce Sylvia White, who is with Aegis and has been involved in the industry drive for increased regulation. She's extremely broad responsibilities across the company, including being a board member and responsibility for all aspects of legal and regulatory compliance. As well, she's been actively involved in the Security and Complex Environment Group in the UK, as well as the International Code of Conduct process, where she was a member of the Temporary Steering Committee. She's a qualified lawyer with many years of experience. With that, I'll pass it over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. I've been having several technical problems today, including losing network during some of the other speakers' presentations, so hopefully that won't happen again. As Rebecca said, the technical problems had to happen at some point. I'll keep my remarks short. I'm going to focus on Aegis's work in the PSC1 pilot program and our approach to training, and particularly with a focus on human rights training, because that was the biggest gap for us when we analyzed PSC1 and what needed to be done in the training arena in particular. In the course of doing that, and in the course of the seminars that have been taking place over the last few Fridays, I've thought about various aspects of it a lot, and one of the conclusions that I've drawn is that for me it's really important that a company does its own training on certain things. Whether or not it requires specific external formal training as well is a different question, but I've certainly come to the conclusion that there are a number of things that should be culturally embedded within the company and within the people that work for that company and the way in which they go about doing their job. And so to ensure that happens, my view is that it's really important that the company is seen to do that training so that it isn't perceived in any way to be an add-on or to be unimportant. So when we looked at PSC1, we, like I'm sure lots of people are doing now, we did a gap analysis and we identified what we needed to do, and particularly what we needed to train in. And the biggest area that was missing was actually not human rights itself, because we already covered human rights and understanding of what they were and where the rights came from, but the particular gap was actually for us human rights impact assessment and how our services and our company fitted into that. We reviewed the various options for providing training, and we looked at what we were trying to achieve. And I'll come back to that, but to a large extent what we really were trying to achieve was it was a bit of a leap in understanding, because what our people think of as good security, or perhaps a hearts and minds approach to security, if you will, there's a lot of overlap between that and human rights, and they don't, and what I believe needs to be achieved under the human rights impact assessment and avoiding negative human rights impacts, or at least minimizing them. So one of the things that we really need to achieve is to get people up the learning curve to understand what is meant by when we're talking about human rights and the impact assessments, etc. And my conclusion was that we as an organization need to get much better understanding of what all of this meant, what it meant for us, what it meant for our services, and really properly embed it in our culture and make sure that our people understood what we expected from them. And so for that reason we chose to do the training in-house. And I guess for me, the advantages of that is that we're combining our knowledge of the industry, but we're also, and there are a lot of people that are actually sitting on this conference who I have a great debt of thanks to, because they've given up their time. Because as well as our internal understanding, I've been able to tap into the outside expertise from those people who've been really ready to speak to me and share their experience, which has been extremely helpful. Who's also, for me, or in my opinion, valuable in actually integrating human rights into the risk analysis, wherever the risk analysis is happening in the business. And I guess one of the things that I've really thought about as I've looked at the Code of Conduct and PSC1, and then increasingly the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, I've started to look at the human rights as being at the top of the pyramid, and all the other regulation and legislation falls somewhere underneath it. And obviously a lot of the things are already factored into things that we do as a company. We have health and safety, we have policies on fairness and labor law, non-discrimination. There's a lot that was already done, but we're really working hard now to try and change the understanding and change the narrative so that people are looking at this from the point of view of the UN Guiding Principles being the kind of the high level, and then everything else really flowing from that. And that's where we're trying to really embed it into our culture and have consideration of human rights as we go about our day-to-day business, just as part of the internal narrative of the company. And we've had the ability, by doing it internally, to adapt the training to context, work environments, and obviously specific examples can be very different depending on the environment that you're working in. So certainly we've found that has been a helpful approach as we've gone through the PSC1 pilot program, and we're currently at stage 2 of that program. So just to turn for a moment to the methods of how we've tried to do this internally. One of the biggest challenges, and I touched on it at the beginning, but one of the biggest challenges is almost selling human rights. And I know I've shocked some people when I've made the comment that sometimes when I am training on human rights, people switch off and they see human rights issues as a little bit of a first world problem. And I appreciate that that's anathema to the human rights experts out there and perhaps sounds counterintuitive. But unfortunately, in the UK, whenever human rights is mentioned, it tends to be either about something extremely trivial or in the context of someone who's accused of terrorist atrocities not being able to be moved somewhere else and extradited. And while we all appreciate the subtleties of the serious rights that are behind that, obviously to perhaps laymen who don't have a background in the law, they're a little bit more perplexed. And I've had to try to get people to realize that by talking about human rights, we're not talking about frivolities. The classic UK one is the schoolgirl who doesn't want to wear a skirt to school when all the boys get to wear trousers. And so, that's not the type of things we're talking about. We're talking about fundamental rights that you take absolutely for granted. So we've been trying to frame it in a way that people really understand that perhaps sounds trite, but putting human as in human rights comes first, the person comes first, and giving it a context not only in our business when it takes place out in various perhaps more risky environments, more fragile environments or complex environments, to use the words of the IPSC, but also how it actually applies back in head office and how it applies from a corporate perspective. So we've done most of that so far through face-to-face training, and we are at the early stages of embedding this. We've got some human rights champions in the business that we're doing some sessions with, and we are going to tabletop exercises where some of the scenarios are being sent in the guys in the field are coming up with scenarios, and then we're working it through with them in tabletop exercises. Our plan is to take that, the basic background training in human rights. We hope that we will be able to move to delivering that on our web-based portal, and then certainly for the majority of our personnel. And then the tabletop exercises we'd still like to do in either face-to-face or in sort of WebEx type environments, so that there's more interaction and people are learning. And then finally, just turning to how and when we deliver it, I think it's a bit of a continuous learning, but it clearly needs to be delivered on induction training or pre-deployment to specific roles for those going out in the field, and it needs regular refreshers. We're putting that in as part of the sort of rules for the use of force or graduated force response training, because that's already baked into our program that it happens at the beginning, and then the continuation training happens regularly. So that gives us a nice, the pattern is already there for that. And as I said, we're doing it a combination of in-person, and hopefully by sort of middle of next year, part of it will be done online. And that, I think, is really all I had to say. Hopefully prompt a few questions later.
Okay, many thanks, Sylvia. Now for the state perspective, we're going to move to Colonel Meyer, but just to give a quick input into how the rest of the day will move. After the Colonel does his presentation, we'll have a quick feedback and discussion session, and then we'll hand it back to the Colonel, who will lead us through a practical exercise. So Colonel Meyer is Director Contractor Standards and Compliance in the Office of Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the U.S., with the primary responsibility to develop policy and manage department level oversight for private security contractors. He has represented the U.S. in Montreux and has been a technical advisor for the International Code of Conduct for Private Security Providers. And in this portfolio is the inclusion of integration of human rights and anti-human trafficking policy into U.S. contingency contracting. I could list his awards, but it would use up the rest of our time. So I think the Colonel, his achievements stand for themselves, and I will pass it over to him now.
Thank you. I'm not going to take very long on this, because I want to spend more time on the discussion at the end here and the opportunity to open it up for questions. I just want to bring up that in terms of methods of providing, one of the things that has come up in our discussions over the past week, and I do want to say I really appreciate the participation that we've had in the last week. By the way, can everybody hear me, or am I offline again?
You're good, Colonel. Go ahead.
Oh, good, because we had that problem before. So I didn't want to go on for 10 minutes and not have anybody hear me. We've had a lot of good participation over the last week. We've really been hoping to, that's the kind of participation we've been hoping to have in the times leading up to this in the previous sessions. Much of what we have, what was discussed over the past week didn't directly relate to what we're trying to do right now, methods, and or actually of the last week in terms of what needed to be trained. But it did anticipate other things that we're going to be discussing now, like methods of delivery. We've heard so far excellent presentations on institutional delivery, on delivery by commercial providers using web-based applications or in person, or in-house application. What, from a government's perspective, I want to say that we are really not, at least from the United States government, we're not wedded to any specific method that this training is provided, so long as the training is provided in a way which achieves clear, objective, and measurable outcomes for the training that are consistent with the requirements under U.S. law and other obligations, such as those that we have voluntarily assumed under the Montreux document. The Defense Department right now has many models of such training that can be used right now, which were largely developed for the military in terms of military purposes. Some of these come up in terms of things like what is required for even cultural awareness or the first aid training, the technical skills that were mentioned before and in the conversation over the past week. These are nice models that can be used and can be developed by other organizations and to be delivered to civilians as adapted as appropriate. Again, we don't really care. We don't really mandate a specific kind of training. Similarly, and I'm sure there's somebody from the State Department, if they're listening, will correct me, but under the WIPS contract, there is not a standard training that has to be performed. Rather, the vendor has to submit to the State Department its training program and outcome, in which case the State Department will review it and say whether that meets their requirements or not. Again, what we've seen is we've seen an opportunity for institutions, whether they're academic institutions or otherwise, for commercial entities, for in-house contractors, to develop their own methods of training to meet the outcomes that we are trying to identify here. And this is the whole goal of this, to identify those outcomes, to develop the opportunities, to work on different ways to meet the same requirement. That's the government perspective. That's what I want to make sure that people understand as we begin to move forward. And really, that's all that I need to say about it right now. I'm hoping to move on to the discussion and the end discussion piece where we actually tie it into the scenario.
Thank you, Colonel. So rather than try to wrap up everybody's presentation and summarize everybody's presentation, I'd just like to try to draw a very subjective line through things. And one thing that really dawned on me through the discussion is this tension between the scalability and the creation of dynamics. Aaron mentioned that there's a challenge towards getting the material out to many providers or to many trainees, and therefore the need to become efficient in using technology. The presenters from Sanremo made mention of the Sanremo spirit and the importance of getting people together in a room, probably in a nice place like Sanremo, and creating an identity for the group, a dynamic between the trainers and the trainees. This was also mentioned by Sylvia in the sense of really focusing on the importance of in-house training, because this is where it becomes culturally embedded. The subject matter becomes culturally embedded in the trainees. And that actually points, I would like to kick things off with a question, and then we'll hand it over to the floor. And what Sylvia mentioned was something that I've been thinking about a lot based on my own experience in the sense of ownership. And I think we know for all of those who train militaries, police forces, and for myself with experience in training armed non-state actors, the sense of ownership is extremely important, that they get a sense that this is their material that they're being trained on. It's not something that's being imposed from the outside. So I was very interested to hear Sylvia say that she has discovered that this is important in the corporate climate as well. So I would like to hear our speakers to shed some light on this tension that I've mentioned, the importance of ownership, the importance of cultural embedding, while at the same time trying to get this material out to a large number of people and make sure that it is covered. So I will leave that open to the panelists, and once that is answered, then we'll go to the floor.
Jonathan, Sylvia here. I just think it depends on what it is that you're actually training, how important the cultural aspect is. So Aaron talked about training people in English language, I think, and obviously that's a skill that they needed to get, the way he phrased it, to then proceed and learn other things. There may come a time where I feel my organization is so familiar with talking about human rights at the top level, and the way they analyze their risk is so based on human rights that we might feel it's appropriate to do it in a much more scalable way. But I don't think we're there yet. So from my view, it depends on what you're training in and the relative importance of whether you need scalability or whether you need the creation of the dynamic.
Thanks. Anybody else want to take up the question?
If I can jump in, I think one of the, this is Aaron Ralby, I think one of the things that was very appealing to the Libyans in their perspective of looking at the program that we developed was that it was one that could be run by Libyans and that they could take a certain degree of ownership. They knew that they didn't have the expertise to develop all the materials themselves, but it was very appealing to them that it could be run and facilitated largely by Libyans and that they could take that ownership. So I do think it is an important piece.
If I may, one of the things we work with Libyans, for example, this year again, and we are actually working at an MOU between the TIHL and the Libyan Ministry of Defense. One of the things that they got very interested in is that we could provide trainers actually using their own language, using Arabic. So I've heard about the importance of actually using English, and I do not deny it's quite important in the operational field these days. But to be able to provide an audience with the actually training in their own language is something that's quite important, and that from that we can probably proceed with other type of trainings, maybe in the English language. But to be able to provide in either Arabic, Chinese, Russian, or whatever, French, Spanish, Portuguese, as we do, is also of utmost importance. Then people get a sense of ownership because it's in their own language. They immediately relate to that situation. They can start owning it because they work and think in their own language. Over to you.
Okay, I think that was a very key point in terms of the last notion on language. And even when we need to work with translators, it can be difficult, but we can also learn how to maximize the use of translation and interpretation. One of the challenges is to find qualified and good trainers in all languages. So again, there's often sometimes a tension between trying to do it in the host language, but to have the qualified people, the people who are able to do it, especially in languages that are not as common as the major ones. If nobody else wants to jump in on that question, then I would like to open it to the floor and ask Rebecca to manage who will have the floor.
Okay, thanks so much, Jonathan, and thanks to all our presenters. Really interesting and getting at a really key issue of how we deliver training. So I'm just looking to see if there's any questions. Just again to remind people to ask your questions, simply raise your hand by hitting on the icon with the hand over by your navigation bar on the right. Let's see. I do not see any hands at this point, in which case I may just hand things back over to Chris to kind of set up this discussion a little better by basing it around information on the scenario.
Sorry. Can I just
Sure.
jump in there and add a point about the language?
Absolutely.
Because one of the things that we did with the program that we're running here is that we subtitled the entire core program in Arabic, and I completely agree that it's really important to have to be able to deliver training in the local language. We weren't sure if the subtitling would work, but I can say that it has worked very well, so that you get both the training in English, but it's in an intelligible form, and that is familiar to the trainees, and they can process complex conceptual material very easily, even if they don't understand the English that's being spoken. And in terms of the delivery by local facilitators, that's actually one of the appeals, is that that they can use their own language and use the language of the trainees to help speed up the process and make it easier and explain things. So I think it's a very important point, and I think it's one using if you're careful in selecting the content, and because it's a complex process to get everything subtitled, and it's very expensive. But if you're very selective in terms of the material, then it's a great way to provide training in multiple languages. So just wanted to add that point.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Aaron.
I always say,
oh, sorry.
I'll just make one final point in the sense that I always say that translation is the weakest link. Everything else can be done perfectly, and if the translation falters, then you get to the training and you're in trouble.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And actually,
Yes.
While you guys were making those points, we did have a question, Debbie Avent, and we're going to unmute you, Debbie, so you can go ahead and unmute. We can go ahead, speak.
Wow, I can speak. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Rebecca. And I thought this was a really interesting discussion. And it occurred to me when Aaron was speaking that, part of what we're thinking about is training different portions of different organizations. And there might be some very interesting, more general level trainings for kind of the higher echelons of the organization that could then be sort of translated within the organization to sort of deal with the cultural elements and kind of the ownership issues that came up. So it seems like there might be some hints of ways in which we could develop for different contexts general level and perhaps online training modules that then could be used, and perhaps even we could think about developing materials that could be used more internally for those organizations to train their own employees. So I thought this was actually really a useful discussion, and sort of when you think about the practicalities of it, it gives you a lot of ideas about what to do.
Okay, thanks, Betty. Thanks for that. And I'm just checking to see if we have any more questions. Otherwise, I will turn things over to Chris. And I think for today, we finally have a chance to actually get down into the scenario a little more. So looking forward to actually doing that, since we've been short on discussion time for last week. So Chris, if you want to take it from here.
Okay, but I'm going to back up to what we were just talking about on 2 points here. Debbie made a very good point about the different training and at different levels. The important part is that whether this training is provided in-house or whether you have it provided from an external source, the training, and especially the training that's required under contracts to the U.S. government, absolutely has to be documented. Of course, that's required under the PSC standard as well, but we also understand from past experience that in many cases, companies are actually doing a very good job of doing the training, of providing the training to a very high standard, but they don't document it. And like anything else in the contracting world, if it's not documented, it's not done. So please remember that. And the second part is that I just want to bring out that in terms of translations, there's a bunch of wonderful tools out there, and I don't like to recommend any one particular product, but there is a series of products made by a company called QuickPoint, which provides graphic, cartoon-like ways to be able to communicate with different people. There isn't one that's specifically for PSC training right now, but there isn't many of them that affect the things that PSCs do. And I'm not recommending QuickPoint per se, but just as a model of the kinds of things that can be done to get around those translation barriers. Okay, now we're actually I'm going to open up my screen. Good. Can we see my screen now? If so, you should just see Transitional National Government Guidelines for Private Military
Yeah, we see it, Chris.
Good. Okay, I never know. Yeah, I need feedback. Okay, so you should have all received this by now. This is now what the idea is that the issuance of the guidelines by the Transitional National Government might not specifically relate to what we're talking about right now, but I'm feeding to you these things in a way to show that you don't always get everything up at once, and sometimes things that you get later on are like, gee, I wish I knew that before. Okay, so I don't deliberately like to withhold information, everybody, but there was a purpose for it this time, and that is that you don't always get the information that you want up front. So I don't know that this affects our discussion right now. It may have affected discussions earlier, but please keep this in mind as we go through later. So I just encourage everybody to read this and to understand it and keep this in mind as we go forward. This is, again, one of those things that's actually based on a combination of of examples that have actually existed, some of which were good and some of which had some problems with them. Okay, next one. Now what we're supposed to be doing, how training should be delivered. So we've talked about who needs to be trained, what needs to be trained. I try to keep on keeping everybody in mind to say that the training that that we're going to give needs to be able to be standardized in such a way, not in terms of so much delivery, but in terms of outcome. So the first question that you should have all seen to be able to think about is that which elements are so important that consistency of training and training outcomes are essential for all, or at least all within a particular audience category. This goes back to what we were talking about audience categories as being local national hires, PMSC and PMC management, and then the staff who are actually performing the work out there, in addition to the people around the PSCs who are affected by them, to include clients of PSCs. That leads into the second bullet. And so which of these, now we have to think about, are some elements are more going to wind up being more suitable for certain delivery methods than others. Some of this stuff you're going to want to do in-house no matter what, because it deals with a company proprietary matters. Others can be provided commercially. Others might be able to be provided commercially, but for the purposes of international legitimacy and credibility, might be better provided by an institute. And we've heard from several institutes on how those things can be done. And then how are we going to deliver it? And we've heard online, we've heard at the very, very local level. And for in-house training, I want you to think about train the trainer concepts, where you might want to send somebody to a institute that has some sort of international credibility, such as the International Institute of Humanitarian Law, different institutes of the Geneva Center for Security Policy, just to name a couple, that then you would be able to send your person there, and whether it's for your in-house or for a commercial provider, to be certified to train that course, for example, Law of Armed Conflict, and then that person would then deliver a packaged training program to your people based upon that internationally recognized institute's processes and procedures. With that, I want to throw it open to the floor and hear what comments we have, so that we don't have to rely exclusively on the email for the next week.
That is a good idea, Chris. Although I do have to say again, we have a great email exchange going. So again, if anyone would like to make a comment, speakers, presenters, you are all unmuted, I believe, right, Mohammed? So you guys can jump in whenever you feel like it. And the rest of those in the audience, again, just using the raise the hand function so you can pose a question. I'll leave it open here for a second. Anyone jump in?
And a reminder, you can always type in your questions too on the sidebar.
Yeah, exactly, and everyone can see this as well. But it may be easier to have people just speak up. If you have no questions, do any of the presenters want to jump in?
Well, if no one's going to jump in, I'll throw out one. Which of these elements are so important to consistency of training objectives essential to all? And I will throw out Law of Armed Conflict. That I think that it's very important that we can identify specific training objectives that relate to the Law of Armed Conflict as they relate to PSCs that are critically important to be understood by the private security company staff in the field, the management, the clients who might apply them, and to those who are working around them to understand how law of armed conflict fits within PSCs. Any comments on that?
Yeah, Debbie actually does. Debbie, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Well, I'm going to unmute
Sure.
Debbie, and then go ahead, Xavier. So, Debbie, go ahead. Debbie?
I actually agree with you, Chris, on that, but there's just the issue partly is how do you talk about it? I mean, what you say about the law of armed conflict might be different for different audiences. So what you would say, you know, sort of at a level, you know, the level that we're talking about right now might be different from what you would say to the managers of companies in a sort of practical way, which might be different again from the staff training. So I think in terms of the principles, that makes complete sense, but you just might need to translate it a bit or, you know, just change the language in ways that to make it practical for the different audiences.
Could I rephrase that as saying that the things that they need to learn, the outcomes are the same, but the methods of delivery will change depending upon the audience? Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Xavier, did you have something there?
Sure, we completely concur, and actually it's a very complicated matter to adopt and to actually modify your training depending on the audiences, because the law is the law. But there's two things that do not change, and especially from a purely methodological point of view, and that's the fact that if you want people to actually get something from the training, you get to make them work on issues, on specific issues. And I do believe that it's a huge amount of work to actually develop a very specific training for PSCs. But of course, it can be done, and it has been done. We were quite prepared last year after we published these roundtable minutes dedicated to private military and security companies. We were quite prepared to offer a very specific training for PMSC's personnel, and it didn't happen for a number of reasons. But for example, the Institute has already prepared quite a specific workshop for personnel for PMSC, and we think we are quite ready when time comes and the industry is prepared to get on with it, to deliver such courses and to make people work and to make people own and to make people understand the requirements of the law on conflicts and human rights within the frame of the PMSC activities, whatever it actually is. So quite completely concur with what's been said before.
So Xavier, am I hearing you say that the one-page summary of law of armed conflict that we attach to our PSC contracts is somehow insufficient? I'm joking, of course. It's horribly insufficient.
Yeah, I think you're joking, but yeah, we are quite prepared at the Institute to run such courses and to actually further develop very specific training dedicated to PMSC and to make people own really what are the requirements of law and conflict and human rights within the frame of their activities.
Okay, well, moving on to the next two bullets with that. I mean, other
I be able
people
to
chime in, but I want to people to
Chris,
think
can
about
I?
it too.
Chris, I think there's a couple more people want to chime in.
Okay, sure.
Chris, hi, it's Sylvia White here. Our head of training in Iraq, in fact, actually raised with me recently whether or not it was still appropriate to be training in the laws of armed conflict, and we had a very interesting discussion about it, and we settled. He agreed that he would continue doing it, but he felt that the environment had moved on so much that he really wasn't sure that he felt it perhaps sent mixed messages. And he made a very valid point that, you know, the more he wishes for people to understand they're no longer in the military, then the less, and because the environment has changed so much in Iraq, he doesn't really feel like he wishes to train the law of armed conflict as the law of armed conflict. And we came out to the conclusion that we still needed people to understand the principles that were there, but that perhaps we would look at some of the ways in which we trained it. So I just add it into the debate. Perhaps it will stimulate more discussion.
Rebecca, can I add one quick point that in situations where law of armed conflict is relevant, I think it's important to discuss the notion, the relationship between the notion of personal right to self-defense or personal self-defense and defense of others and law of armed conflict, particularly when it comes to participation in hostilities.
Okay, thank you.
Those are both excellent points about different subjects. I do want to say for Sylvia that yes, it may not seem like it makes much sense, but A, I can fall back to, since I'm a government representative, it's the law. You have to train them in law of armed conflict, and that's actually in our law. The second thing is that, and it's also in the Montreux document, and it's also in the International Code of Conduct. So yes, but the methods are going to have to change a little bit. But you never know. I mean, the guys who were sitting guarding oil fields in Libya probably thought that the law of armed conflict had nothing to do with them whatsoever until suddenly they wound up being participants in hostilities.
And indeed, that was exactly the point that I made back to him and the discussion that then ensued. So he was keeping it in, but I just wanted to make the point that the guys don't always get it immediately.
Okay, Chris, there's actually, I'm going to go ahead and there was a comment that was made. This gets to, I believe, more so the question, yes? Okay. This gets more to the question of methods of delivery. One concern, the comment reads, one concern with regards to human rights web-based training, it might remove the sincerity of the training and become a check-the-box approach. It may work well with language programs, but may not be the right approach for human rights training as it separates the basic element behind this training, the human. And then I'm going to tack on to that question of methods of delivery my own question. Chris, one of the issues that you had raised at some point was, in terms of deciding what should be delivered, online, face-to-face, what should be delivered pre-deployment, versus in the region. And I'm curious, in particular with regards to the latter, to hear from actual providers of training services, what kind of trainings is it really important to deliver, kind of like on location, and why? So those perhaps, responds to the comment about human rights, and also a question about, in particular, curious as to what kind of trainings need to happen. And there's one, sorry, and I'm going to add on one more from Andrew. Can the panel please comment on how to train PSC personnel of a very low educational standard? Also an important question that came up also on email. So Chris, do you want to maybe start us off, and then I'll open it up to others?
Just a real quick comment about that. Yeah, that's, we remove the human part of it. Sometimes, though, we have to think about it. That might not be a bad thing. In, for example, I have to go through annually CTIP training, counter trafficking in persons training, which is provided online. And they can provide in these online things information that you just can't get otherwise, information that might not be readily available, images that can really grab you viscerally and help you understand it, and the opportunity to actually do scenario-driven online exercises which allow you to apply the information that's being learned. Look at the games our kids are playing these days. I think that we have a wonderful opportunity to be able to use that same technology to actually provide scenario-driven instruction. Just my thought.
Okay, and I'm just going to add on one thing. I think in particular, picking up on the human rights issue and having taught Human Rights 101 to undergrads, way too much. I think there is definitely value. It's not necessarily, and I think this is something that Aaron got at, necessarily having your kind of high-level trainers necessarily there face-to-face interacting with the students, but when it comes to the kind of scenarios and interactions, I think particularly with very challenging human rights situations and scenarios you're working through, it's really good to be able to discuss it with people in kind of a group setting. And that, and as we said, that need not necessarily require, you know, the highest level trainer there, but a facilitator who can really get that conversation going, because in many of those situations there is not a correct answer per se. And I think so face-to-face discussion in those cases could be really useful. And I'd like to hear, so if others want to chime in particular, I really would like to hear what, I'm curious, just what people think needs to be, kind of training needs to be provided kind of on the ground.
This is Aaron Robbie. I can chime in on a couple of points there. Notably about the combination of web-based and human, or you know, technology-based and human interaction, that it needn't be one or the other. You can actually combine both. And in terms of just from personal experience, you know, in delivering some video-based instruction, where I have appeared in videos, and I have met students who have gone through the program, and it's a very strange experience when I meet them, because I've never seen them before in my life, but they talk to me as though they know me. So there is something of a human experience there, but it is about combination and using the combination efficiently. And I think in terms of what training needs to be provided on the ground, just from what the work I've been doing, part of it is, you know, what's the scale and who needs to be doing the training, because if they need to, and who needs to travel where to get the training. So if it's, you know, several thousand people needing to travel to one place to do the training, or a handful of trainers going out somewhere to do the training, I think those kind of logistical questions will often dictate what kind of training gets done where.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Aaron, while we have you here on mic, can you comment perhaps to the question that came from Andrew with regards to how one trains people with very low educational levels? You know, in particular, some of the topics we're talking about are ones like, you know, IHL. They could be very complex. So do you have any thoughts in terms of how one delivers content maybe to people who have, you know, elementary level education?
Yeah, actually I do, because that was one of the requirements as well. I didn't mention it, but that was one of the requirements for this program. And I think a lot there has to do with the course design, and it front loads a lot of the work in terms of developing a course, because you can build into the course design and into the method of delivery, you know, breaking things down. If you're talking about training people with low levels of education, you have to break things down into much smaller pieces and deliver them in a slower, more digestible way that you wouldn't have to do with more educated trainees. And if you can, the best thing to be able to do is design a program where the breakdowns are segmented so that you can deliver essentially the same program to people of a higher education level. They don't have to sit through the really monotonous breakdowns of material, but at the same time those breakdowns are available for people who are at a lower level of education and need more time and more explanation to understand. So if that kind of distribution of material, distribution of content, the delivery of content can be segmented or partitioned off so that it's possible to work through the program quickly for more educated learners, and possible to take more time and go through in a more easily digestible format. That's the best. But what it does is it puts a huge burden on the course design and the preparation of the materials. Once that's done, though, it can be easier after that. So that's sort of my view on working with people with lower education levels, because you kind of have to bring them up to speed. You have to provide that education.
Very good. Did anyone want to chime in on that point as well? Otherwise, I have some follow-up questions.
I might make one point on that to say that I think it's really important to give them a level of comfort. And I think too much being swimming in text and swimming in charts and diagrams can make people with lower education levels feel uncomfortable. So provide them with space. If you're doing presentations, just have the structure have a lot of space in it. Give them some videos, some cartoons, some things like that to help break it up a little bit, because once they'll come on board if they feel comfortable.
Actually, I'm going to follow that up what you just said with two questions, which I hope are not too provocative, but should there be some kind of minimal education required for security providers? I know that some countries' laws actually do establish certain levels of I think it's up to primary education, thinking of some Latin American countries here. Or, is that not sufficient? Or could one potentially, thinking that a lot of companies have to work with local nationals because of the dynamics of the market, is it conceivable that one could use illiterate people as well and find ways of training them with other types of visual materials? And then the second question is, and not sure if I want to open this can of worms, but I will, what about training on, for example, we know that human rights trainings are going to be required or are being required by a number of these standards. What about training on human rights in countries that may not accept the full spectrum of human rights as they're laid out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? So, for example, may have very different notions of what type of rights women enjoy, for example, using an obvious one and a hot button one. So I'm going to throw those two questions out there and see if anyone has anything to say.
I would say,
on the second one, if you.
Sure, Sylvia, and then maybe Xavier after Sylvia.
sure.
On the second one, again, speaking to our team who are training and trying to get an understanding of how they make these things work on the ground, the feedback that I got was that on human rights, the example they actually gave that was more difficult is in terms of how you might treat a person. In certain jurisdictions, it's not unusual for perhaps to be roughed up by the police or anybody else, and they said they have to do a combination of the training and then the command and control element, and just make sure that people are absolutely clear about what behaviours are acceptable on the ground, and then and keep reinforcing that. But they did acknowledge that it can be a problem in cultures where they don't have quite the same respect for certain things as we might take for granted.
Thanks, Sylvia. Xavier, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I would say that we are quite used to actually draft soldiers cards for rules of engagement for our military personnel, and I think that the intellectual level we should have with regard to personnel of PSC or PMSC is an intellectual level that allows them to understand what their rules of engagement are. Sometimes it's quite basic, and that's quite basic language, and it doesn't have to be very complicated. And actually, if it is complicated, it just misses the point. So I think that we need a certain level of literacy among the PMSC personnel. That doesn't have to be very high. We probably can build scenarios for exercises that can be very understandable for large segments of the population. We are used in our military services to train personnel which are not necessarily on the scale of understanding so high, but we manage to make them work and to make them understand how they should use their gun, or they should use their batons, or they should use their non-lethal weapons. So why not? We need to require the same kind of literacy and understanding for PMSCs. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think I agree with Xavier completely. I think that there absolutely needs to be a basic level. If we're going to go through the effort of developing rules for the use of force cards, for soldiers with a high degree of of education, always significantly higher degree when we're talking about Western forces. Why do we think that we should be able to have local national PSC personnel who have the same authorizations or responsibilities to use deadly force, who can't even read the rules for the use of force card that we require everybody else to have? On the other hand, the reality is that the literacy rate in Afghanistan runs about 2 or 3%. And 94% of our PSC personnel, and that includes all of the APPF personnel, Afghan Public Protection Force personnel, have the same literacy rate of about 2 or 3%. So, you know, we can agree that they should be able to. The reality is that it isn't that way, and what problems are we having as a result of that?
Thanks, Chris. It's actually now 2 of 12. Chris, did you have any other final comments? Otherwise, I'd suggest that we close.
No, we started talking a little bit about, you know, the NTIR rules for the use of force, a little bit about human rights law, a little bit about the law of armed conflict within each of those 4 bullet areas. And I think that that's a good start. And I think that now that we're thinking along those lines and we have those bullets, I'm looking forward to some really good conversations over email over the next week. Thank you.
Great. And so, Chris, that's a great segue. Those of you who participated today, if you're not already on our email burst, I will be adding you to that, and then you can partake in the conversation. I will touch base with the organizers of the workshop to see what they think of the idea of maybe creating a Google group so we have a history that we can draw on in terms of these valuable conversations that are being had. And I'd like to remind everyone to next week tune in. I realize for the Americans on the call, it's the day after Thanksgiving. So if you're willing to pass up 2 hours of your Black Friday shopping and join us online, I'd really encourage you to do so, because I think it's going to be one of, well, these are all very essential conversations, but a very essential one nevertheless, relatively speaking, because it's about quality assurance. And that's kind of where the rub always is when it comes to a standard. You can create the best standard, but if you can't assure that it's actually being adhered to and met, then it's kind of meaningless. So we're going to get to that really tough question: how do we assure the quality? And yeah. So that's next week. Please let any interested colleagues know about the workshop, and we will speak with you then. Thanks again to all of our presenters, and Jonathan, thank you for moderating. Everyone, take care. Bye-bye.